All right, so the formalities at the beginning of Nicholas Godejohn's interrogation, that's what we're seeing right now on the tape. I want to bring in my guests. I have Ross Kramer, criminal defense attorney, with me here in studio, and Stephen Greenberg, also a criminal defense attorney, with me via Skype. Now, Ross brought up a good point just as we saw this video begin to roll, and that's the fact that Nicholas Godejohn consented to this interview, perhaps, presumably without asking for an attorney or anything like that, could be a sign of his state of mind about how he thinks or does not think about things. Ross, tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a witness who was going to go in here and confess. He was going to stand up or sit down at this meeting, and he had no defense to it. He just wanted to sit down with a prosecutor and get this all off his chest. That in a way, there was nothing he was going to say that was going to help him there. And if the defense is going to be arguing that there is some diminished mental capacity and that he shouldn't have, this testimony shouldn't be allowed into evidence, the fact that this witness, that this defendant even sat down in the first place and was under the misconception that this was going to help him somehow might be evidence that he had some kind of diminished mental capacity.
Stephen, do you agree with that?
Well, I don't agree with the last part of that, because every defendant who sits down with the cops and tells a story thinks it's going to help them in some way or another. Many times they think that it's going to get them out of trouble. It rarely does. Of course, the old saying is, he who doesn't talk walks, and no one should ever talk. But I think what's going to come across in this interview, based on other things that I've seen with this particular defendant, is that it's going to come across that he's slow, that he's easy to manipulate, which does fit in with the defense they want to put forward in this case.
Okay, Steve, thanks for that. Gentlemen, hold those thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, much more live from the courtroom and much more from this interrogation of Godejohn. Stay with us. So we are watching this interrogation video, the lead detective on this case questioning Nicholas Godejohn after his arrest. She started out by saying, look, we've talked to Gypsy. She told us a lot of stuff. Now I want to hear from you. Obviously, as you can hear, Godejohn is very agreeable and cooperative so far in this interrogation. And as we know, this is an hour-and-a-half interrogation, in which he essentially admits to killing Dee Dee and walks the detective through the entire plan, really. The defense, rather, had asked the judge several times to dismiss this confession. Ross Kramer with me here in studio. I'm sure it's clear to see why they would not want this played before jurors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's clear that they wouldn't want this played because it shows from his own mouth, in his own words, exactly what he's admitting to having done. But at the same time, now that it's in, the jury doesn't hear the legal arguments behind the scenes about the defense wanting to keep this out. Now that it's in, they have to use it, and they have to try to spin it in a direction that would be most helpful to them. So they're going to say, I imagine, in closing or later on, look at his demeanor there. Look at the way that he describes what happened. Look at his body language. This isn't someone who had an appropriate appreciation of what he was doing at the time, and they're going to try to make the best use of it they can.
Stephen Greenberg, also a criminal defense attorney, is with us via Skype. Steve, if this was your client, how would you try to spin this video when he essentially lays out the whole story of what happened and how he did it?
Well, that he really did.
Looks like we're having some audio issues with Steve and Skype. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with much more live right after this. So we are listening to the interrogation of Nicholas Godejohn after his arrest, and he's talking about stabbing Dee Dee Blanchard. We heard him say he did it because Gypsy asked him to do it multiple times, and he would do anything with her. He worships her. I want to bring in my guests because there's a lot of chatter online on our chat room right now about Godejohn's sort of demeanor and how he's coming off in this interview with detectives. A lot of our viewers think, yeah, he definitely sounds not exactly right. Stephen, let me start with you, criminal defense attorney Stephen Greenberg, who's joining us from the Chicago area via Skype. Stephen, what do you make of sort of Nicholas's demeanor during this interview with the detective? And at this point, does she likely, you think, suspect that perhaps he is on the spectrum, as we now know he is, or has other intellectual or developmental issues?
Well, I'm sure the detective knew before she walked into the room if he had any kind of intellectual or developmental issues. That'd be part of the background they would find out. What she's doing, though, is she's playing on the fact that he loves and would do anything for Gypsy. You heard her say, you can help Gypsy out. You can do this for her. You can make things better for her. And when she said that, he just started talking and talking and talking. What gets me is how flat he is and how unemotional he is about anything. Everything he describes is just perfectly flat, no change in his tone, no change in his facial expressions at all. It's really, some people would think it's very cold to watch. Some people will think she's taking advantage of him or he was taking advantage of.
I mean, Ross, what do you think? Do you think that it does seem like she's taking advantage of him? I mean, as I said earlier, he's very agreeable. He's answering all the questions. He's not denying anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one problem she probably has here, you know, you can't be perfect in anything like this because you're dealing with a real person and you're in the heat of the moment. She's asking him a lot of leading questions. And when you watch it, it's susceptible when someone does that to a later accusation that she's putting words in his mouth. So she's asking him, you know, what kind of knife was it? And then she'll presume the answer to it, and he'll agree to some of it. But I think that this could be a very useful interview for the defense. Obviously, it's hurtful, but at a certain time, you know, this is in evidence, and you have to make it work for you. I think if I was on this defense team, I would have an expert look at this video. This is an hour and a half. This is as good as sitting with this witness and spending a lot of time with him. And I'd have an expert look at this and say, this is not the demeanor, this is not the word choice, this is not the storytelling method of someone who is competent and who is able to defend themselves and shouldn't have been in that interview room and probably couldn't have formulated the intent to commit the crime. So I think that this video and the strange behavior on it does open up some avenues for the defense in this case.
Well, we will see whether the defense, if they do in fact bring on their own expert to sort of talk about him and how he's acting in this interrogation video. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. While we were in break, that interrogation video finally wrapped up. It ended with Godejohn telling the detective that they were on the bus heading back to Wisconsin. They had the money they had stolen from Dee Dee's safe. They were talking about what they were going to go do with the money and what was next for them. So a lot to digest. Almost 90 minutes there of Godejohn talking, telling his side of the story. A lot of little nuggets there that I want to get to. But first, you know, the big goal here of prosecutors is to prove to jurors that this was a premeditated murder and killing. And my question for my guests, Ross Kramer and Stephen Greenberg, was, in this video, we hear Godejohn talking about this plan, talking about how they planned the killing, how Gypsy had asked him to do it, how she had bought the gloves, how she had bought the knife. I mean, does this prove the prosecutor's point that this was a premeditated murder, Ross?
I mean, I think that this video cuts both ways. I think, obviously, he talks about the level of planning, the long-term discussion that they had, showing up at the house with a plan, traveling to town there with a plan. But at the same time, his behavior and his demeanor in this video was so bizarre that I think the defendants are at least going to have something to work with here. They would have, hopefully they've had a psychiatrist or some other expert looking at this, some behavioral expert who can say, you know, jury, look at this. He's describing his breakfast choices the next day at a diner exactly the same way, with exactly the same tone that he described killing his girlfriend's mother. Something is clearly wrong with this person, and he may not have the mental capacity to have formed that premeditation. So I think that this video makes the trial interesting because it gives both sides something to grab onto.
Stephen, do you agree with that? That, you know, there is an argument on the defense's side here? I mean, look, I mean, perhaps, you know, they bought gloves and did some planning, but really he didn't know enough?
Well, I thought there was a stronger argument before I watched this whole video. Unfortunately, there's a lot in the video that's troubling. There's not only the planning, but there's the really bizarre behavior afterwards. They clean up the blood, they go and they have sex, things like that. It's going to be really an uphill battle now for the defense.
Yeah,
he's just not a likable guy.
you bring up the sex after the killing. I mean, I think that struck a lot of people. Okay, here, you know, there's blood all over. This girl's mother, really the only family or person really she's ever close to in her life, is lying there dead, covered in blood, and then they go into the bedroom and then have sex. I mean, clearly that shows certainly a little bit of disconnect from the situation. No one is crying over this and, oh my God, let's clean up and get out of here right away. I mean, Ross, the sex after the killing, how does that play in jurors' minds?
I mean, I think this goes, you know, all of this, I think, goes both ways. It's bizarre behavior, but at the same time, it's so bizarre that I think that there's something for a defense counsel to make of it and saying this was not a person who was acting in his right mind. And certainly when he got towards the end of that video and he started discussing his multiple personalities and his girlfriend's multiple personalities and his evil side and his good side, certainly alarm bells must have been going off for the detective there. They must have been going off for prosecutors when they were watching this and saying, you know, we're going to have a fight here, and we know that there's going to be some sort of defense here about his mental condition. And I think that if a defense lawyer does this right, he'll at least bring it into issue. Yeah,
I mean, so you bring it up there. He said, I have an evil side and a good side. The evil side was me killing Dee Dee, although he said that was like the only time his evil side had come out. Do you think he was making that up, Steve?
I don't think he was making it up, because you can watch him and you can tell the guy's just off somehow. The, you know, it's the mother. You brought up the mother laying there and they're having sex in the other room. No one's crying over her. She was not a good mother. I think that's helpful to the defense. She was not a good person at all. So you don't have a sympathetic victim. You've got a sympathetic defendant. You've got a sympathetic co-defendant who's going to testify, I understand. And you can meld all that together. The problem is that you've got to get 12 people to agree. A jury has to be unanimous, whatever they find. Maybe you get a hung jury at the end of the day. But I don't think you're going to be able to say that he didn't have the capacity to plan this event. It clearly was planned out. He knew what he was doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, talking about jurors and getting them to agree, I mean, probably everyone will agree that they feel sorry, maybe felt sorry for Gypsy in this case. I mean, the whole thing is kind of a sad situation. This guy gets involved in this, you know, awful relationship between mother and daughter here, and now she's in jail for 10 years, and he's looking at even more than that. What factor do you think sympathy might play, Ross?
You know, I thought it was interesting. I think he said one thing that struck me as particularly unsympathetic in his video when he was talking about why he did it towards the beginning. And he didn't say, I knew that we had to do it because I had to get the woman I loved out of this circumstance. He said, I knew this was the only way for us to be together. It was sort of a selfish take on it as opposed to a third-party self-defense kind of take, which would have made him, I think, sound a lot more sympathetic and made the whole situation seem sympathetic, saying, you know, when I heard about what was happening to this woman, I fell in love with her, and the only way to stop this abuse was to get the mother out of the picture. He didn't take that tack. I think he had a very honest tone throughout this. There's obviously something wrong with him, but I think he was trying to tell the truth and what he was thinking at the time. And he said, I wanted to be with this woman, and to do that, we needed to get her mother out of the way.
Right. I mean, the whole, you know, and yes, I think absolutely that you're right. He did feel like he said he worshipped her. Clearly, she was in a bad situation. It is just a bizarre case all around because of this Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which so many people probably never heard about before they heard of this case or perhaps saw the documentary or the 2020 special on it. The point is, Dee Dee Blanchard managed to manipulate friends, family, everyone into thinking her daughter was sick. She medicated her daughter for a long list of conditions that she didn't have just to get sympathy from other people. Earlier today, we had a psychiatrist on the program who specializes in this syndrome. Let's listen a little bit how he described it.
The thing about Munchausen by proxy is that the perpetrators, which are almost always the mothers of the victim, who is their child, know exactly what they're doing. When you look at Dee Dee Blanchard's case, for instance, there was extensive planning involved in what she did. She misled so many people over so many years that, and lied to doctors, that you can't just say, well, maybe she truly believed the child was sick, that maybe she had some kind of psychotic delusion. None of her behavior suggested that she was ever psychotic. And that's true in all Munchausen by proxy cases. If they were psychotic, we'd call it schizophrenia or a psychotic disorder or something else. But This is willful, volitional behavior that somebody chooses to engage in.
Dr. Mark Feldman, sorry about that, guys. Some interesting analysis there and interpretation. You know, I thought, wow, I hadn't really heard of this, but Ross, you say you've actually had cases where this has come up.
Yeah, I mean, it is very unusual, but it is something that happens, and you know, I think it's a particularly sympathetic issue that can come up in trials. Here, the mom isn't there to defend herself, isn't there to explain it, and actually the victim of it, Gypsy, ended up taking a plea and getting out of here. So you're not dealing in this trial as much with the psychological issues of the Munchausen by proxy. Here you're dealing with the psychological issues that have to do with the defendant in the case and whether he had the capacity, the mental capacity to deal with this.
Ross, thank you so much for your analysis. Stephen, as well, I want to thank you both for being with us. As always, day one of this trial almost in the books. We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, Aaron will be here live with the Daily Debrief. Thanks so much for being with us this afternoon, and stay tuned. Much more on this case out of Missouri coming up next with Aaron Keller in today's Daily Debrief. Thanks, everyone, for watching with me.